Welcome to the Deer Society podcast. Here's your host, Brian Lemke.
Yeah, this is who I am. Well, I'm a deer hunting man.
Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the Deer Society podcast. Brian Lemke here, joined with Mike and JJ Dukart. We are well into December. We are past post-rut, and I think, really, we are late season now. This is the time where if you still got a tag in your pocket, you're probably grinding it out, and maybe a big buck's on the top of your Christmas list. So, third week of December here, Christmas right around the corner. Everybody, happy holidays. What's on the Christmas list for this year, guys?
Ooh.
Habitat improvement gear. That's what's on my list because the big buck was checked off.
The big buck was checked off, and let's be more detailed. We're getting a skid loader.
Nice. Well, you must be on the nice list then.
Well, yeah, we are. It's been a great year, everybody's been well behaved. I mean, you can't misbehave when you're laid up for the most part, and in COVID protocol, but no, it's been a fantastic year, just in life, in family, and in hunting, and yeah, now we're gonna get a skid loader.
What about Brian? What's on your list?
Well, I'll tell you what's on my list. Big buck. I would like to shoot one more big buck this year, and hopefully it's by the end of the year, but it could go into January. I still have a Minnesota and Wisconsin tag in my pocket. Minnesota goes till the end of the year here, and then Wisconsin actually goes a little longer than that, so till January 9th, I believe. So I still have a big buck that I'd like to check off my list. That's probably top of the Christmas list. But so skid loader, I want to talk about that. What, do you have one picked out? What kind of attachments? What's the purpose? What's the want behind the skid loader?
Well, it's just the next step up from the tractor that we got. Grapple bucket is a big deal for us. We got to do some trail work, so cutting trails, moving trees. We're doing some logging January on the property in about 3 weeks here. So maybe cleaning up after those guys a little bit, digging some water holes, clearing some brush, everything.
He's being pretty vague there. We have major plans for 2022, and like JJ mentioned, it starts out with taking some timber, and taking the timber off was a strategy for Oak Roost because we already did our hinge cut over on the original Cedar Springs. So the next phase of major timber work was going to be taking actual timber off of Oak Roost because Oak Roost had the mature timber. So we're dealing with some really old oak stands and just some very unique and, to be honest with you, much sought after wood and type trees out there. So it is something that, professionals would want to come in and actually cut the timber out of there. And by golly, the markets would. I just seen this weekend, I got a post from Wall Street Journal that timber prices are up 65%. So they're prepping, and so, yeah, that's just a bonus. Who knows? Maybe we'll get enough revenue out of there to pay for that skid loader and that equipment. So that's really the beginning of it. And so once you do that big infrastructure change, then you have to, strategically design the property so that it's going to, really pay off for you in the long run. And we have a lot of big visions on that from, new growth, from, core, what we'll call infrastructure trails, and just strategy of what we're going to do for food. We're going to be adding food. We need strategy on how to hunt the property. So that's a whole infrastructure in itself. I mean, this is going to go on for years and years and years. It's water. It's just all these crazy cool things. And like I say, he was being kind of general. Yeah, there's some big plans, and that piece of equipment's vital for being able to do that.
Yeah, like just the other day, I went and closed the windows up for good in the bat blind because they were open. We didn't want coons and whatnot getting in there this winter. drive to the bat blind basically, and there's deer 200 yards away running away. They can see that far. So it's just it's way too wide open. Those big canopies are blocking out all the sun. Deer just sit in that valley and just watch. You can't access it at all. They just blow right out. So getting some of those big trees on the ground and thickening it up is huge. We'll do some hinge cutting in there too.
Yeah, it's literally impossible to hunt the 50 plus acres now, what we'll call Oak Roost, that actually now bleeds into the new property that we bought. But it's physically impossible to get into the timber and hunt it without blowing the deer out of there. You can't do it right now.
Well, that's awesome. I'll be excited to see some of that stuff come this winter and spring. And if you guys aren't familiar, what they're talking about is their whitetails from scratch property too. Oak Roost, Cedar Springs, how they've broken it up. Definitely check that series out on YouTube. We have a brand new episode that we're going to launch here coming up. And it'll actually be featuring the 2 bucks that Mike and JJ took off that property. Whitetails from scratch, really cool. A lot of good advice in there, a lot of good tips. And really just a cool series to be able to see a property, whitetails from scratch, a clean slate, and then you guys really transforming it. And it's cool to see that, you took 2 big bucks off it this year, but it doesn't stop there at all. It's going to continue to transform and continue to mold into something bigger and better each year. And I think that's really cool. I think that's something that everybody can relate to, whether you have your own piece of property or, whether you just have a permission piece or a lease or, even public land hunters. Everybody can take a little something from Whitetails from scratch. And it's not something that, transforms just in one year. It's such a continual process year after year of learning and trying different things and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't, and just continuously improving upon that piece.
Yeah, I mean, we got a plan we put in place with Andy a couple of years ago, but like we've talked about kind of in the office here is, this plan is kind of
Fluid.
A fluid plan. So each year you look at it, you see, what went well, what didn't, you'd make changes. And you kind of just look forward to that next year, and it's just this fluid plan that keeps, you keep tweaking it a little bit. It's not like it's set in stone based on the map and everything we've done. So yeah, it's been a fun process. A couple cool things or interesting things we'll keep an eye on these next couple months. We actually had a bunch of tornadoes rip through last week, and we have standing corn. It just got completely flattened, so that's kind of interesting to see how that impacts the deer, if they're going to keep using that or if the snow will cover that up, if that's a good spot for sheds or if that's just going to be a raccoon haven now. I don't really know. And we probably lost some trees there too, so we'll see that when we walk through the timber. And then as we do this timber harvest in January, obviously we're probably going to blow a lot of the deer out of the area that have been comfortable there. We got some nice bucks, a lot of does hitting our standing crop, standing beans, standing corn. Is that going to blow them out for the season, or are they going to come back with all those, treetops and start eating those and all the buds that come with that and, all that fresh cutting? Are they going to smell that and come back in and then take advantage of our grain? And it's going to be like a double whammy. I don't know. It'll be fun to shed hunt it for sure.
Yeah. I mean, like you say, we've had the property. It's the 3rd year, and we're learning. We're just learning the property. We're learning how the deer are using it. And then, so if we make a major change, like we did, we made a major hinge cut change, okay? Then we made another major change. We actually opened up food the 2nd year and added water and then added onto the property. And so we're learning how these deer are interacting and reacting. So how are they interacting with the property and how are they reacting to what we did, from removing fence line barriers to adding some security on the outside borders by adding fence, and those types of things, along with, seeing which deer came back and how they behave. I mean, we got bucks that are visiting the property that are not what we call, what do you call that? The core bucks, okay? But they come at certain times of the year, and we've been seeing them. And then we have our core bucks. And so how are they all interacting? How are they all behaving? Our core bucks that are bigger, older, and tougher Are they going to come in and change the dynamic of the outer bucks? Did I say core? I didn't mean to say that. The non-core bucks. Are they going to come in and change the behavior of the core bucks? Very likely, that something like that is going to happen. And the age structure, the first time this year that I noticed was, now we got, older bucks. These guys are competing for does. And I mean, they're going at it. I mean, one of the deer that we took, he took some real injury. You know what I mean? And when you get an older buck, there's another buck out there that's super going to be really old. He could be 8 next year if he survives. And what's that buck going to do to some of these 5 and 6, 7-year-old target bucks? How's that all going to pan out? We don't know any of that, So if you can put in the right habitat and hold numerous mature bucks, that's really our goal. But we got to kind of see how this all works out. One thing I can say is after we took 2 of our shooter bucks off, our target bucks, now our fingers are crossed and all the anxiety. Oh, I hope those ones that are coming up that we're letting go, live, or I hope that other shooter, he lived. And I'm knocking on wood right now, but they are showing up, changing pattern, looking for the last does, looking for some food. We have food on the property now. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to leave it at that. I threw a lot out there, but this property, the changes that you make have huge impact. And I can't wait to finally get that 50 to 80 acre piece that has not really been touched from a management perspective, just to get in there, get that timber out, and start building off that blank canvas, because that is one heck of a piece of property that we haven't been able to utilize at all.
Oh, well, I want to shift gears a little bit here. And, we got a couple weeks left in the season. Now down south, certain places, the season's open for quite a while, even through January and parts of February. But, here we have a couple weeks left, Wisconsin, a few more than that. We're in that late season mindset now. So, JJ, obviously you don't have a Minnesota tag in your pocket, but, if you did, what's your mindset going into the last couple weeks of the season?
Well, yeah, I'd be a little bit more into checking trail cameras, more scouting right now. I'm just kind of laying back, leaving deer alone. Hopefully they survive. If I still had a tag in my pocket, I'd definitely be more aggressive hunting from the ground. I like fresh snow. We always like to put our white suits on, just get after it. I know I've mentioned to Brian a couple times, like, well, you could always hunt from the ground here. Yeah, just start getting aggressive. I mean, we got 10 days left. Find that food they're hitting. Get after it. I know. Maybe you can kind of touch on what you've been seeing the past week or so, but I mean, our standing corn's been getting hammered, our standing beans, especially when we had that snow. Now that melted off, it seems like the deer are scattering, spreading out a little bit and just kind of browsing, which is not good for the bow hunter with a late season tag in their pocket. But that's kind of where it's at. I mean, just get after it.
It's tough that you don't have the snow this time of year, late season, because it's not really driving them to a food pattern. They definitely are going more after food. I would say that right now, if I'm going to answer the question you asked him, if I was going to go hunt, what I would do is exactly what JJ said. I would really watch my cameras. I would really now start looking for a pattern. They're going to start settling into, after these this second, whatever you want to call it, estrus push of the does that didn't get bred. That's happening right now. And, we're seeing the deer. They're kind of moving around, but I also think that they're not mad at each other anymore, and they're going to settle into a pattern. I think they will. I think you're going to see a pattern, and that's what I would be looking for. What's this buck doing? What's his favorite spot for bedding based on wind? And what's his favorite food spot? What is he on for food? And that's what I would start looking for, and then I would jump out there during that window. Some of the biggest bucks that we shoot, weather has a big impact on it. JJ's brought this to my attention, and if I would have listened to him, maybe I would have shot Curly instead of him. But whenever we have a really big, nasty cold snap, and we've talked about this before, and it's followed up with a south warm up, they move. And you better be there. You know what I mean? And especially if you got them patterned on that food, late season food, behavioral type thing, because now they're not out running all over the place looking for does. So that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, well, I'll kind of follow up with, so having a tag still in my pocket, I have hunted a couple times here, just over the last couple weeks, not too much, but sat a couple times, and it's interesting what I've seen. So what we had here in Minnesota was no snow. And there was, let's take a cut cornfield that I drove by one of our farms, and there was 50 deer out in this cut cornfield. Again, no snow. So went and put some reveals up there, and boom, right away, shooter bucks. There was one or two of them right there, but a ton of deer activity. Well, 2 days following that, we got dumped on with 13 inches of snow. Changed completely right away. Once that snow hit, those deer completely moved from there, and we had some standing beans on the other side of the farm, and knew that snow, that cold was going to drive them to more standing food. There were standing beans over there and some standing corn. Went and jumped into that spot. Now, this is a spot that I had not been in all year. Had a muzzleloader in hand. It was still muzzleloader season. We had a couple days left. And jumped in there in the evening and saw 13 bucks that night. Now, I was shocked. I feel like every buck we had on the property was over there by those standing beans. And they were going different places. They were going standing beans, they were going to a pick bean field, and they were going to standing corn. But the snow really drove them there. Saw some really nice bucks, some really good up-and-comers. One deer that was a target buck was with the doe, actually. Now, this is just a week ago, and it goes to what you were saying. In this last estrus push, it was a young doe. So one that had come in late, I would imagine. He stayed out of range and didn't get a crack at him. But sat those 2 nights in a row and saw over 20 bucks in those 2 days. And again, it was a standing food situation. It was snow. Interestingly enough, the first night we had a northwest wind, so it was still that cold front. It was kind of the end of it. A lot of deer moving. The next night it warmed up, and it was that south wind that you were talking about. Saw probably the same amount of bucks, but it was really good. Deer actually moved earlier on the second night than the first night with that south wind warm up. Now, interestingly enough, we've had some crazy weather here in the Midwest. So you mentioned we had some tornadoes come through. We had almost a 70-degree day the other day, melted all of our snow. So now, completely situation in 1 week, we had 13 inches of snow to no snow. Well, guess what? Those cameras that were back on that north side on that cut corn, which were dead when that snow came, they've lit back up. So I'm seeing a lot of deer going back over there, a lot of deer in different places. They're kind of spread out now because they can browse anywhere, right? So they don't have to be pushed to that standing food. So, having that tag still in my pocket, I'm looking at it going, okay, man, I'm praying for some snow. I'm praying for some cold weather because I know that that's going to drive those deer back to that standing food. But other than that, I'm going to watch those cameras around. I'm going to kind of base my efforts now in the last 10 days on what I've seen here. Okay, if we have no snow, then, maybe deer kind of spread out, go into those secondary locations. Something interesting happened. Lance, a buddy of mine who's on one of our properties as well, texted me, and he's got some cameras out in some different places. And we have one buck, and he's actually the oldest buck on our farm. One that we've known for years, and Lance found the sheds off of him here last year. And this buck now in the morning has showed up twice in the last few days, 2-3 days, 2 times, going back to this bedding knob where Lance found his sheds last year. So we know that this deer really frequented this area this time last year. He's starting to do that again, and Lance's text was actually interesting, and it said pattern developing ? Now, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, wow, so this buck has done this now a couple mornings. We found his sheds there last year. He did it last year. How do we put together a plan to go in there now and take advantage, because we have a good idea that, this is a 6.5-year-old deer. he's probably moving into that same pattern that he did the year before and maybe the year before that. So, that's something that I'm going to look to take advantage of maybe, or Lance will here in the last 10 days. But I think it's late season, you have to have a big buck to shoot one, and, looking for those patterns, paying attention to where deer are based on what the weather is, and getting aggressive at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said when the snow melted, those deer went back to that cut corn. It's kind of like it opens up a lot of opportunities if you do have a bunch of stands out there that aren't on that standing, that food source, because now you can start hunting all that other stuff that was dead when we had that foot of snow. That's kind of nice that it opens up some windows for you there too.
Yeah.
But
having more options is definitely the way to go. But yeah, as far as that buck you're talking about, those are the late season patterns that I was kind of referring to as well. If you can get him back into a pattern, and you start remembering some stuff from the previous years, you kind of see their behavior, and we had that same thing going on with certain deer as well. It's like, oh, he didn't show up until this time. Boom, there he showed up. And some of it's changing a little bit. I mean, just because of the differences that we're doing with the timber and the food sources and whatnot. But yeah, developing patterns late season. But now I'm thinking to myself, what about all of our listeners that are down south? We're talking about a late season here compared to a late season in Alabama or Texas or something like that are two completely different things. Or even if you want to go down, even to Arkansas, just right below that Missouri line where you start to get kind of warmer, and they don't get the snow. They don't get the cold that we get. What are those deer doing late season? In my opinion, I think that their behavior is similar. They're doing some similar things. So I think you can take some of the strategy that we're talking about and you can use those tactics down there, but you have to keep in mind it's going to be a little bit later. I mean, Texas rut is going to be coming up. I don't know if they're even in rut yet down there, are they? I haven't talked to anybody. I haven't been keeping up on it, but
yeah, I think parts are probably just kicking off. Like I know down in the Delta and Mississippi, like their rut's full swing right now.
It's full swing right now. So San Antonio, down in the southern Texas areas like that, it may be just beginning to start. Maybe up in the Panhandle, they've been getting some cold snaps and some different things. Probably kicked in pretty good, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think you're right on the money. I think deer, whitetails specifically, probably have a lot of the same behavior. So if you're down south or in different areas, take these tactics that we're talking about, but like you said, just be conscious of where you're at and relate them, to when they're going on, during that time of year where you're at.
And spin them into food sources. I mean, I don't know the preferred food source of a cold snap down south compared to a cold snap up north. And I can pretty much guarantee you they're different behaviors, because I see different behaviors in deer up in Canada, whitetail, that we see here in Minnesota. And that's not that far away, but it's definitely a lot colder up there than what we get. We're in southeast Minnesota, so we're kind of, we don't get that northern Minnesota, Canada cold. It dips down to us, but it's not a consistent, We don't have the snow depth consistently year round that they have up there either. So that kind of thing changes. And I've been seeing stuff on, online that they talk about, well, deer prefer this particular thing and this stuff, and I find out that the study's all done in Mississippi or something. Well, how does that fare with our deer? So keep an open mind, just because we're saying something or you're reading something, go by what you're seeing. Go, my whole thing is, and I built my entire hunting philosophy in my company and everything around this one statement. Take in as much information as you possibly can, sort it out, and throw out the stuff that doesn't work for you or doesn't, have a reference to your deal. So take that same kind of approach when you're hearing what we're talking about. Because we say they're going to beans, that doesn't mean you necessarily want to, maybe it is true though, or maybe it isn't true. I don't know. So what are the food sources? What are the ways to go? And I'm just trying to throw mud at the wall here and open up conversation.
Well, even just from where we hunt here, and then I go up 2 hours north in Wisconsin, we got I planted the same exact food plot, purple top turnips and the radishes with the rye and all that, and the deer didn't even touch it. I got 3/4 of an acre sitting there, and the bulbs are laying up on top, and the deer just walk through it and go to a cut cornfield. It's like 2 hours away, and they're not even reacting to that food. Like, they don't even know it's a food source for them. They got to learn about it or something.
How long have you had that food plot there?
I've planted turnips there. It's been a couple years since I had turnips in. So that was a brand new food plot. So yeah, they just, I don't know, maybe nobody around there plants that type of stuff. They're not figuring it out. It's kind of depressing because it looks like a magazine cover and there's not a single deer in it.
That's crazy. Well, it's so interesting because that is a great point. And I think, it'd be interesting. You should try to plant those turnips, a few years in a row to see, next year or the year after, how long it takes them to really understand that that's a food source and it's beneficial to them. I look back at, hunting in Alberta. So this is mule deer hunting now in Alberta. And I remember, we're hunting like this, this big open country. And we crest this one hill, and there is a cornfield that's probably, I don't know how many acres it was. It was at least a 10 to 20 acre cornfield. It just beautiful standing, and I'm like, oh my God, there has got to be deer flooding to that in the evening. Like, we need to sit here and glass and see what the deer coming out. And the guy that I was hunting with up there, he says, nope, not worth it. He said, you will not see a deer touch that cornfield. And I'm like, Midwest thinking, like, man, why not? Nope, they don't use it. They don't use it like we do here. They do here in the Midwest. And I think that's just another thing. Like, yeah, is it beneficial to them? Sure. But is it an understanding thing? Is it, what is it? But he said, nope, you'll never see a deer in there ever.
I'm going to comment on that because I think I know why. And corn is mostly carbohydrate. And it does have protein value, don't get me wrong. But, and I was just going to comment on this before you made that about the corn up in Canada. What maybe not everyone understands, and it just kind of clicked in my brain, to be honest with you, is JJ was talking about, well, they don't touch the bulbs. They don't, the brassicas, that, la, la, la. And it's like, you know what, though? Maybe you're just far up enough to where you have a change in plant diets that are more beneficial. And what I mean by that, and this I know, Minnesota, if you graze cattle, okay, cut hay, this, that, blah, 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 and you buy beef here, okay, and we've been eating it forever. We buy directly from the farmer. But we also have a lot of family and stuff out in North Dakota. Well, Southeast Minnesota is completely different than North Dakota in western North Dakota. That's all wide open prairie. I mean, you can get on top of a little knob and you can see for 15 miles. It's crazy out there. It's just gorgeous, beautiful. But the grass, the value, the protein, and the value that they get out of the grass out there compared to our grass and our hay is a whole nother level. And if you compare that beef in a blindfold test side by side, if you're a beef connoisseur, you will not even, 99% of the time, unless you just like different rougher, tougher beef, you're going to go for that North Dakota beef just because of the hay and the grass out there and the makeup of it. So I'm thinking that might be something similar. You get into that rockier soil. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, potentially, and you could be absolutely right. And I don't know what the exact answer is, but yeah, I think you're onto something, and I think that it's just super interesting, and maybe that's, maybe something to do with your turnips too, or maybe it's just a learning thing, because it's not as much of a difference between here and Canada as it is from here to...
Or is it just the soil? You know what I mean? Does the soil, what's that doing to the plant? You know what I mean?
So let's talk about this. Let's talk about, differences in late season food sources. So, you look at different standing food sources. You have corn, you have beans potentially, you have brassicas, right? So you're talking about green versus grain now. What is your mindset going in based on what the weather is this late season, going green versus going grain?
Well, I know around here, Minnesota speaking, they won't hit our greens once we get a foot or more of snow. It pretty much covers them. They just quit going to them altogether this late in the year, and then they're going to the grain. Anything standing they can access. You said they were digging for cut beans the other day, though, which is down there quite a ways where you hunt. So that's interesting. But, yeah, it seems like a little bit of snow greens, especially after a warm-up. A lot of deer go to those greens. They're digging around for a while. Come out early. That southern exposure for sure, and the southern winds coming in, warming up, going to green, and then when we get those big cold fronts, those north winds, cold snaps, they're going to that cornfield right away. We don't have cut beans, so I can't really comment on that. I know they're going to our standing beans quite a bit too. So yeah, I feel like the colder it gets, the more they go to that grain, the standing grain, and then the greens when it warms up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching deer in two different places. One is for, habitat hunting in the land that we have, and I also see deer out in my backyard. There's two different types of behaviors kind of going on there, but they do kind of, they're somewhat similar. I have a unique septic system in my yard that it keeps the ground actually doesn't freeze in a big area in my backyard. So those deer will dig for that green grass to a certain tolerant level. If that snow is too deep, like JJ brought up, I mean, now you're exerting more energy to get that bit of, I'm going to call it graze or browse type food, then it's really benefiting them. If it gets super, super, super cold, they'll just shut down into a hibernation mode. And that goes back to after that super cold front and it warms up, they get up and they'll go out and they're going to move and feed. And that's basically plays into that. I watched them sit all day in that cold, not even move. And they may lift up their front legs, and I've talked about this before, and then kind of settle back down. Now I'm talking 30 below for elongated an extended time period. It shuts them down. They have to shut down just to make it. So at that point in time, your browse and your protein are pretty important. Once you get up, you move, and your metabolism's moving a little better, I think they will go to that carbohydrate too, which, once again, I feel corn is more a carbohydrate than it is a protein. So you have to be careful. If you put a bunch of corn out or force-fed deer with corn during one of these nasty, terrible cold snaps, you could bump their metabolism up to a point where it jacks them up and it can kill them. And that's why your big bucks, in my opinion, when they're run down from the rut and you get that cold snap and it's all over, the last does are done, and they get into this pattern, and this has been documented for quite a long time, that they'll get close to that food source, and they need that protein to build the muscle mass back up. Take a picture and look at the deer in the end of October, beginning of November, pre-rut, getting ready to go out and get it going. And actually in during the rut. And now you take a picture of them late December, and they don't even look like the same deer. If you couldn't tell by the rack, you'd be like, holy cow, that deer looks like what deer did you see the other day that you showed me that he just looked horrible?
Yeah, there's a deer that we don't get many videos of, but it was a middle of November video we got on one of the reveals this year that we all looked at, and he was just a huge body. I mean, his body was bigger than a deer we know was 6, and for sure a deer we know was 7, and he looked bigger bodied than that. And we don't know who he is, so we didn't know how old he was. Well, now we look at him. We got him on camera last night on the reveal. Looked like a 2-year-old. I sent it to Brian. I sent it to you.
Yeah.
And you're like, what deer is that? I'm like, remember that huge bodied?
And that's why I go back to that whole protein thing. And I didn't learn this just from deer and deer hunting and listening to people. I learned this from coaching. I coached hockey for 20 years. And so one of the big things that we had when you got a team, Minnesota's got some pretty highly competitive hockey up here, and we play a lot of games. And what we would find out is our kids would be good. And once we get into that Christmas time and past Christmas time and start getting into that late season into playoffs, they're losing muscle mass. It's crazy. But hockey is a very, very demanding sport. So we focused on, not so much carbohydrates at that time because it was like, hey, let's go have spaghetti dinner before we go play hockey, to give us energy. Well, long term, they need to get protein in their body because they're losing that muscle. And I mean pounds. They're losing pounds and pounds of muscle. And so it's the same concept.
It's interesting that you think of that tactic that way, or think about, what you've learned in coaching and with people and relating it to deer. I try to think that way a lot, and I've learned that from several people over the years that really, have been successful in the whitetail is looking at deer, not humanizing them, right? Because you don't want to humanize them, but I think all deer have different personalities, and I think that you can really relate some of the things in people that you can relate to deer. I think that the south wind, warm up a little bit after a cold front, I think that has a lot to do with, why deer move too. Like they feel good. It's one of those things where I've always had, most of my success in shooting a big deer. Now I know you may disagree with this because you like hunting those nasty, windy days and we talk about big buck days. But to be honest with you, I've seen, I think, more big bucks on their feet, and it goes back to high pressure too, but during sunny, maybe even a little warmer, nicer days. I think those bucks, as much as they want to move during those nasty days, I think those high pressure days, we feel good as people being out there. I think deer, they feel the same way. We've talked about this with the red moon and the way the moon affects, different things. I think deer, to a point, feel the same way as people, not the exact same. I don't want that to come off weird, but I think, using the things that we learn in coaching or with people, I think we can apply to somewhat to deer hunting.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that that warm front scenario yesterday, which, by the way, 5 years ago today, Curly took a nap.
Oh, yeah. Today is the day?
20th, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it would have been 30 below, nasty winds, kind of like.
Well, it was the south side after that, remember?
Yeah, but we caught
warm-up.
that storm that came through. We caught the warm end of it this year. The year of Curly, we were on the cold end of a nasty, nasty front right before that. I mean, it was so cold.
That was days before.
Correct.
So he was back on the south wind day when I shot him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Then just thinking about some of the other bucks I shot, the bigger ones like Beamer, that was south. So that was a cold day, and then I think it was warming up that next day. So kind of when that shift to that south wind, and then the other Wisconsin buck, 6.5-year-old, that was a south wind. So there's definitely some souths mixed into these older bucks I've shot. I know we've had some really good north wind sits too, but it's like 50-50.
Now that you say that, something clicked in my head. Typically the barometer has that, and everybody's like, barometer is religion, right? But typically the barometer, doesn't that go high with a north type of front up here? And so that's kind of going a little bit against that, thought process.
Yeah.
But what's real is real.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not saying that, only go and hunt south winds or don't look at the barometer and whatever else, but I do think that there's something to be said about that. Everybody says hunt the coldest day and hunt the nastiest day. Well, yeah, I'm all about that. I'm probably going to hunt both, but don't, if you're going to get a warm up, don't not go, because it can be really, really good too, obviously.
But, maybe down in, let's go down further, into the United States. Maybe you start getting into that Missouri and Arkansas, Mississippi, and maybe those cold fronts panic the deer. And they feel like they have to go or they're going to die. I don't know. Maybe that's happening down there, but doesn't happen quite that way up here. I don't know. I'm just throwing out conversation, throwing mud at the wall.
Yeah.
I don't know, but if you're down south and you do experience a significant cold snap for your area, try hunting a south warm up, that first south warm up, and see what happens. Or watch your cameras if nothing else.
Yeah, I think such a big tactic right now is cameras too. It's because these deer, especially, I think, are back to that, food source mentality. You're probably, if you're sitting on a food source right now, this time of your late season, you're seeing a lot of deer, and that's what you keep telling me to sit on the ground. I would love to go sit on the ground. It's just, I think in the spot that I need to be to sit on the ground, it's going to be really, really difficult because there are so many deer congregating in this one area. But, watch your cell cameras, watch your reveals, whatever, watch your cameras in general, because, you probably only have a few chances, with that many deer coming out and you're sitting on a food source, it may be hard to get in there and especially harder to get out. So watch your cameras, see what they're telling you and make the move at the right time. We'll see what happens over the next few weeks here. As we get past these next few weeks, we're going to start looking at, what bucks made it, bucks inventory, and then shed season coming up. So I know we'll do a podcast on shed hunting and tips on, where we find sheds, where we like to shed hunt, different things like that. I've already seen 3 different shed bucks on camera. 2 are fully shed, 1 shed early in December, other one just recently shed, and then another one just showed up with half his rack here about 2 days ago. So, as we move further along, we're going to start getting ready for shed season, and that'll be exciting. Yeah, I mean, what have you seen any shed bucks show up yet, JJ?
Have not, but we have some interesting stuff happening with one buck. I know I won't name the name of the buck because we'll wait to see if he gets shot these next 10 days by Chris or if he makes it. But 2 years ago, this buck shed in February because we had pictures of him, with one half side on. Last year, he made it into April. So we have no idea why, but it'll be interesting to see when he sheds this year.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
That's something new to us, new to me. I've never seen anything like that. So we'll see. I hope he sheds in February because then we'll have a chance at finding him again.
Yeah.
But it's coming up quick. I mean,
Yeah.
last year or 2 years ago, blind 10, he shed before Christmas.
Yep, your injured bucks, your wore down bucks, I would expect them to start shedding any time. I would think especially if we get a cold snap and they get into that hunker down mode, where they kind of shut that metabolism down and trying to reserve that internal energy. I think maybe that'll, I don't know, I'm just making it up, but I think that might promote some shedding. I'm going to make one last little quick comment about, we had a question about what's the timber cutting going to do. This popped in my brain, my ADD brain here, but this last year we opened up one of the food plots, the one right by Bat Blind actually. And so we took out some timber along the edge. And so it was later, the food plot was coming up and we thought, did we kind of mess it up? It's going to take time for the deer to come back and start seeing pictures again. Cause that's usually when those first velvet bucks start kind of coming in. We're seeing some of our shooters. And the very night after we cut those trees, deer were already browsing on that stuff that we laid on the ground. And then later on, we had to clear around the telephone poles. That was a county thing. And we made a deal with them. We said, hey, you cut it wide enough and get these out of here and we'll maintain it for you. You won't have to come up here again. And so they did that. And it was a fairly aggressive cut. And we're like, well, did we blow them out? It's starting to get even closer to hunting season now. The opposite. They were literally on that down food that night and into the next day. And they hit it pretty good, actually.
Well, what's interesting about that and diving back into that question, I agree with you. I think that actually my guess, and this is just my opinion, but if I had to guess, you'll find more sheds over there because you do this timber cutting than before. Because I think what is going to happen is deer are curious creatures, right? Go dig a hole out in the middle of your property, right? And uncover a bunch of fresh dirt. Put a camera on it or go in there the next day even or a few days later, right? As much as it's going to bump them off, they're curious. So go look at the tracks in there. I mean, we've dug lots of water holes where you go and dig the water hole and you come back the next day or a few days later. Well, there might not be any water in it yet, but there's deer tracks all over because they're curious. They can smell that. They want to come in and see what's going on. So what I anticipate to happen is, you'll bump those deer out of there. But those deer are going to come back. They're going to see, they're going to be curious. And what are they going to find? They're going to find all this new browse, right? All this woody browse. You talk to Andy Orr, and he talks about the benefits of hinge cutting. And you guys have seen this on the White Toast from Scratch property. Yeah, it's to create cover. But it's a food source and a ridiculously good one. And how many sheds did you guys find because of those hinge cuts last year? I think there's going to be more deer and more sheds in there this year after you do the timber cutting. And I think it's really going to be awesome for holding deer and finding sheds.
Yeah, and the type of timber cutting we have is they're going to cut the tops and leave the tops lay, so all those tops will stay right in the timber instead of pulling them out and then cutting things up, dissecting, whatever. But yeah, if you ever look at a maple or a box elder or like a soft tree poplar in the winter, and you see the top has just thousands of buds on it, now all that's just going to be right down on the ground. So if we get into any softwood with this cutting, which we'll take some, yeah, they're going to hammer it. I don't know what they'll do with the walnuts and oaks with that hardwood, if those buds are as good or not. But if they get into some poplars and maples, and even if we just go in there and do a little hinge cutting ourselves, it's gonna put a lot of food on the ground. But now in January, I don't know. We'll see how the deer react.
Yeah, I mean, at the skid loader, that's why we have to actually have that, is because we have to now create, after they get in there with that timber work, we have to create that habitat. So JJ's absolutely right, and we'll look, whatever they don't take, I'm sure we're going to lay a little bit of food down too in certain strategic areas and that kind of thing. So.
Right on. Well, we're going to wrap this one up. I think we'll have, plenty to report in this next podcast. We'll probably follow up with one here just shortly after the first of the year. Definitely be talking about shed hunting. Definitely be talking about, the timber cutting and how that goes, and be able to report back on that. Hopefully we have a few big bucks to report. I know Chris has still got a tag, and maybe he'll get out here in the next few days. I still obviously have a tag. I'm going to do some research over there in Wisconsin too. They have over there at Homegrown, I'll be hunting, and they have some pretty dynamic food plots, and I'll be able to watch deer on beans and greens and corn and just different things and how they interact. So hopefully bring back some cool things to report there, and maybe a big buck. Fingers crossed. Santa, come on. But we'll see. But thanks for tuning in, guys. Like I said, Whitetails from Scratch. One of the coolest episodes, I think, of Whitetails from Scratch, coming really soon, so you'll want to check that out. And if you haven't watched Whitetails from Scratch yet, go get caught up on it on YouTube or on the Deer Society app before this new one releases, but watch for that. Deer Society app, if you haven't downloaded it, make sure you do so on the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. It's free, lots of good content there. Everybody have a Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you after the first of the year.
Well,